Okay, so
This meeting is being recorded.
I don't see anything.
okay, I'm gonna hit the button. Oh, I guess we already did. Yeah,
Yes.
got some people coming in. Okay, so I want to share my screen. I can find my slides. I wonder how many people went to the session this morning. And
I think there was about 24.
yeah. I was wondering how many of our clients went to there.
Oh.
Which is always possible. You know, we advertise each other's
Okay.
sessions, so it's possible that we ended up sending people there. So we'll wait a couple minutes. Good afternoon to those of you who have joined us. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes. You will be getting a copy of the recording and the slides. So you don't need to take pictures or notes. And I think there's a workbook for this, isn't there, Laura?
There is, yes. Yes.
Okay, so we'll send that out as well if we have, I think we have a copy of it.
Yeah, I can send it again too if you need to.
Yeah. Okay, I think we'll just go ahead. I'll start my slides. If there are anybody else coming in, they won't miss yours. So,
That's fine.
so good afternoon. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us. We're looking forward to a pretty exciting session. But first, I'd like to give you a little bit of information about SCORE. SCORE is a nonprofit. Our mission is to foster vibrant small business communities. And we do this through mentoring and education. We hope that all of you as small business owners have the resources and tools that you need to be successful. SCORE is a network of free volunteer mentors. We have across the nation about 10,000 of us. So if you have an interesting business that someone in Cleveland doesn't have a background to be able to help you, we can call on one of those other 10,000 mentors to help you. We have all types of clients. We're very pleased that about 10% of our clients are veterans, and over 50% of our clients are women. So we provide mentoring. We do mostly remote mentoring still at this time. Of course, we do a lot of webinars, as you are seeing today. But one of our most valuable resources is our website. So go to our website, you will find a list of all the upcoming webinars, plus the recorded webinars that we've done in the past. We are live streaming today, and this should be on our website within the week. But there are many templates and tools, business plans, financial plans, marketing plans, plus a lot of articles and blogs that would be very helpful to you. So our services are free. Much of our funding comes from the Small Business Administration, but we are also funded by a number of organizations in the Cleveland area that are interested in supporting the growth of small businesses. And this is a snapshot of our website. You can go to find a mentor, take a workshop, browse the library, and you will find all of those things I mentioned. Now I'm going to stop sharing and introduce Teresa Barger, who will tell you a little bit about herself and what's going to happen this afternoon. So welcome and take over.
Thank you so much. All right, guys, let me just pull up my screen here. Let me know if you're able to see this.
Got it.
Can you see it? Okay, wonderful.
Yep.
All right, so I am the community manager. I partner with Laura Gibbons. I'm a senior business consultant. So our roles really came out of our racial equity commitment for Chase that not many people know about. But what I'm doing in Cleveland is working with local business owners, nonprofits, city leaders to really discuss what the pain points are and really around financial literacy, because we think here at Chase that, of course, your overall health is, of course, very important, but so is your financial health. That puts you guys in a great state. So knowing this information is what we provide. What Laura does is on the business side, which she'll of course explain. I am more on the general banking side. So I'm in the community doing a few workshops at our Ohio City and Karamu branches around savings, budgeting, credit, fraud protection, and I also work with the students as well. So going into schools and providing that financial education for them. So at the end of this, I'm going to put up a QR code that if you guys are interested in hearing about any other workshops we have available, you can scan that and that goes directly to me so that this way I can send any invitations out for anything you or your family members may be interested in. So Laura, I'm gonna let you take it away on the business side and go over just some of the workshops that you have available, with this one, of course, we're doing today being Business 201.
Today's actually Power Capital, but
Well,
201 is
Power
coming up
People.
on Thursday.
That was the last
So
one.
that's good. That's good. That's good.
Thank you.
Sure, of course. Thanks, Teresa. So,
Mhm.
like she said, my name is Laura Gibbons. So I am a senior business consultant at Chase. So in addition to doing workshops like this to get out to the community and try to help in any way that I can to, get some information around how to access capital, how to navigate your cash flow. We have a business 201 coming up, as well as a marketing in a digital world. All fantastic presentations that I think you can really gain a lot from as a business owner. In addition to the workshops that I do, the extra piece of what I do is also mentor business owners. So that's why we really work well with SCORE, because we kind of both have this passion to help business owners in our communities to grow. So our program's a little bit, it still is a free program, but it's a little bit more geared towards women, veterans, Black and brown business owners that have actively been in business, generating revenue, and been in business at least a year. So there's plenty of information too that, we can get you as far as, different workshops like Teresa mentioned that we do, with SCORE, and on the personal side when it comes to home lending, investing, all different kinds of things. So as much information that we can get out into the community as possible. So today we're talking about the power of capital. We actually will send out a workbook at the end. So I will reference the workbook a little bit through this presentation, but don't worry, I'll get you the information. A lot of times people say, oh, the slides were a little bit small on my phone. Don't worry. Everything that we cover will be in the book, even in more detail than you're going to see on the screen. And there'll even be some activities that you can do and kind of continue to go back and reference. So, all right, if you could push it over to the next slide, and one more, and we're good there. Okay, so typically if we are in person, I would ask you to kind of show me, your hands as far as where you think your comfort level is when it comes to your confidence about your knowledge of business credit options. But obviously we're not in that position today. So I just want you to kind of think it through, and hopefully as we go through this presentation, if you're sitting at a 2 now, you end up being at a 3. And if you're at a 3, maybe you'll be a 4. Okay. And really it's just to bring some of the basic information so that you have a foundation as you continue to kind of move your business forward. Okay. All right, next slide, please. So what we're going to cover today is to think strategically about why cash flow is so important to the survival of your business. All right. Does your business actually need to borrow? So there's some questions that you're going to need to ask yourself before you consider even getting a loan, right? Looking at the bigger picture. So there's an activity that, we'll talk through that you'll be able to look back in your book on around understanding whether it makes sense to borrow right now. What financial data is important. That's a really big deal. A lot of times people say, I don't know what they're going to ask for. I just want to make sure that I'm prepared and what they're going to look for. So we'll talk through that. And then what are the different credit options, right? So we're just going to talk high level around a couple of different things. Excuse me. A lot of times people think there's so many different things out there and there's really not, right? So we're going to kind of break those down so that you feel like you have a kind of a nice base as we move forward. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about cash flow. Next slide, please. When you have money, you can spend it right now, right? So if you have the flexibility to take advantage of opportunities and challenges as they emerge. So yes, having cash in the bank obviously is very important. However, cash flow is a completely different meaning. It's that you have money actually coming in as it's going out, right? So it's a continual cash flow process, right? Because at the end of the day, you could be sitting on a ton of money, but if you got a ton of bills, it's just going to continue to dwindle down, right? So the cash has to be flowing in. Next slide, please. So the cash to conduct daily business, right, is important. The cash enables business owners to make quick decisions about when and how to invest their time and resources. So think of it from, cash is going to help you to pay your suppliers, pay your employees, rent your space, potentially reinvest in your business, right? A host of different things. Next slide, please. So there's an example in the book that it's going to go a little bit deeper. I'm just going to go high level on it, but this is an example of how successful businesses can actually still run into cash flow problems. So Tiffany's business has found a niche. She's busy serving clients. She hires help and ramps up her business. She's buying a lot of equipment, ordering lunches and dinners for her team to work late hours. She gets a call from a bank that her accounts are overdrawn. So she looks at her invoices and sees that many have not come in and a lot of others are not even due yet. So it's going to be weeks before she has cash on hand that she needs. Next slide, please. So what does this story kind of tell us? Number one, most importantly, is that cash flow needs to be managed. Okay. A lot of times I ask my mentees, how are you keeping track of the money that's coming in and out of your account? Sometimes people say, I don't. right? Is if I got money in the bank, I spend it on what I need. Not very efficient, because what if that money's earmarked for payroll or something else, right? Now you spent it and didn't even realize it. Okay. Some others say that they use Excel spreadsheets or they keep it written down in a journal. That's fine. Okay. It's better than not doing anything at all. However, there's software out there, free software that you could be using that can help you to link to your accounts, organize how the money flows in and out so that you can see it better. It gives you access to reporting, right? All these things that we're going to talk more about in this conversation that you're going to need to present yourself to the bank or to anyone when it comes time to get a loan. You need to have an efficient process for payables and receivables, right? This can help better manage the timing of the revenue and expenses, right? So even at bare minimum, if you're doing online banking, it is allowing you to set up to pay people when your bills are due, right? So that you don't have to mail a check and do it 2 weeks before. You can wait till maybe the day before, or if we have to mail a check for you, maybe 5 days before, but it's going to keep money in your account for a longer period of time, right? And then invoicing, that's always a big one. If you are a contractor or do any type of industry where you are invoicing your clients to bill you, you cannot do a job and wait 3 months to send your invoices out, right? You can't pay your bills with the invoices. So having an efficient process for how you pay and how you receive money is crucial to the cash flow scenario. Okay. All right. Next slide, please. So does your business need to borrow? So let's ask ourselves some questions. The next slide, please. This is the most important thing I'm going to say within this whole entire presentation. And it's something that a lot of people don't think about because I don't know, from a startup perspective, we think, hey, we need to have some startup funds, right? So we need to be able to get this business off the ground. But from the lender's perspective, or from anyone who's going to give you money, the thing that they want to know is that if you borrow capital, that you need to have a way to pay it back, right? And sure, there's a business plan and projections that you can make, but projections are just that, right? It's a hypothetical of what I think is going to come in and not actually hard numbers yet, right? So that's why, which we'll talk more about, why it's so important to have a solid plan and projections to be able to make whoever's lending money to you feel comfortable that you're going to have the ability to pay them back. Okay. Next slide, please. So let's talk about what lenders want to know. All right. When you go in to actually get a loan, these are some of the things that are important to us. How long have you been in business? Right? Because that's going to tell us a couple of different things. What kind of data we're going to ask you for, because I'm not going to ask you for 2 years of tax returns if you're a startup, right? But I am going to ask you for a resume and projections and a business plan and 2 years of personal, right? So it's different depending on that and how you answer that question. Is your business profitable? So a business that's making money is actually the best candidate for credit, right? So think about it once again from the lender's point of view, is that most lenders focus on profit and cash flow because these are the strongest indicators of whether the business does have long-term potential, right? And just like negative cash flow is a signal that a business could have trouble repaying its loan, right? So, if you're having a difficult time showing income on your tax return, we understand a couple first years in, you're going to put a lot of money back into the business, right? But it gets to a point when you need to borrow that if you're showing a negative income, it looks like you don't have enough money to pay the debt that you want to take on. And that's a real problem. Okay. Another question is your business seasonal? So think about an industry like, I always think of concrete, a landscaper that doesn't do plowing. That is somebody who maybe doesn't work all year round, right? So maybe they need a line of credit to supplement the income while they're not working for 2 or 3 months, right? So that's why we ask that question. Do you need to build credit, right? Because maybe business is doing solid. You got your cash flow is fantastic. Your collateral's good, but your credit's a little questionable because some of the things that might have happened in the past, right? And a new business needs to show a history of responsible borrowing to qualify for larger loans, right? Sometimes we tell you that, a business credit card is often a good way to get started to build credit, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Another question they're going to say is, are you looking to expand, right? Is by adding employees or a new location to your already profitable business, you're going to increase revenue and profitability potentially. So you may need credit to do an expansion. And then maybe it's new equipment, right? Will new equipment help your business? If essential equipment is limiting your growth, it might make sense to borrow to increase your revenue potential, okay? All right, next slide. I always throw this in there because, we use the term credit a lot. We talk about credit score, credit report, credit meaning, a loan. So for the case of this presentation, the word credit is to mean the agreement between a borrower and a lender, such as a credit card, a line of credit, or a loan. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so when you guys get your workbooks, okay, I'm through page 6 through 8, I believe. There's some questions that you want to kind of think about when you think about looking at the bigger picture around borrowing. All right. So especially what we had just gone through in COVID, there's a lot of things that you maybe need to ask yourself before you think about taking on money, right? So let me just give you a couple examples of what you're going to see in your workbook. So don't get nervous that you can't see the slide in small print. The environment, right? So one of the questions is, how has the last year changed the way you think about your business? Or who are your competitors? And what have they done to adapt in the past year, right? There's things we can learn from our competitors in the sense of, is it smart to take on a loan right now and go into growth mode, right? Economy's in somewhat of a recession. Thinking about some of these things first about your environment before you think about potentially moving forward. There's some operations questions that you need to think through. What steps have you taken to prepare for a setback, right? Do you have a plan? How confident are you in your supplier's ability to deliver? So that's a real big question. You could borrow money, purchase a ton of inventory. Your supplier can't provide it to you within a 3-month period. And now your buyers are going somewhere else. So now you're sitting on all this inventory, cash, right, that you can't unload. So these are things that you kind of have to really consider before you think about taking on something like a loan. Okay. All right, next slide, please. So why are you a good investment? Next slide, please. So this is, you got to remember that you are your business's most important asset, right? You know how the business runs inside and out, right? This is your chance to show that you're someone to bet on, right? But the same theme is gonna ring through. It doesn't matter how great your idea is. If a lender isn't confident that you're going to do what it takes to pay off your loan, they're not going to invest in you. So this is where I want to kind of talk about the business plan and projections piece. I'm also going to share a cash flow calculator with everybody on this call. Okay. With the workbook, it will come over to you. This cash flow calculator, in my opinion, is not only to put in some equations to say, hey, what'll happen if I add this employee? What would this do to my bottom line over the next 12 months? It's really a great projection tool because you could take a spot, kind of a check of a month, right? Inflows and outflows, and you could change the frequency. So this outflow happens maybe once a month. This inflow happens every day, whatever the case is, you can kind of do a month snapshot and you could run the report. It's going to, if all things remain the same, it's going to do it for 12 months. Beautiful pie charts, graphs. You can import that information right into your business plan from your projection piece. Then you can go in and say, okay, I plan to grow maybe 10% in the second year, tweak your numbers a little bit, run it again. Now you have your second year projections. Okay. There's something really important about the projection piece when it comes to lending, not only for the bank. All right. Yes, the bank wants to understand that you have a plan of how you are going to sell your product and make money on your product. Like, hey, if I sell to 2 people per day at this price point over the 6 days that I'm open, this is how much I'm going to make. This is what my costs are. Here's my expenses. All of that is really important so that we understand how long is it going to take you to be able to pay the loan back, right? But there's another piece of this that is so important, and this is for you, the business owner. How do you have a business function if you're not even sure how much you're going to make or what it's going to take, right? Because you're going to come into the bank and ask for a loan, and you can't just say, 50,000 sounds about right, right? We want you to really, truly have dug into the numbers to understand, hey, this is what it's going to take me to get there. And here's where I'm going to start being able to make actually an income on this and be able to pay this loan back. Because if we give you 50,000 and you don't have a plan, as soon as that 50,000 is gone, you have no plan. And now you're sitting on $50,000 in debt. Okay. So business plan, even more critical. Think about how you need to explain what you do. You know your business inside out. You need to explain what you do on paper so that somebody else can read it and literally understand exactly what you do, from the owners to how the product is made, how the product is sold, what it costs, and everything in between, as detailed as possible. Okay. Very, very important when it comes to any type of lending. That doesn't even just mean bank lending. Okay. All right, next slide, please. So I want you to have some questions here that that will help you to prepare when you go into the bank. A couple of questions that you need to prepare to answer, I guess I should say, when you go into the bank for the loan. Number one is leadership. All right. What's your business or management history? So what I mean by that is if you're a contractor that decides you want to open a restaurant, right? We need to understand where the experience comes in. So maybe you're a contractor that's going to open a restaurant, but you have a chef that's been in the business for 10 to 15 years. Like, it's important to say that, right? Because we want to understand that there's some management history there. How did you decide to start this particular business, right? It's been in my family for years, or I've worked under another person and now I want to break off on my own, right? All of that shows experience within the industry. Do your business partners or members of your management team have experience managing or growing capital, right? So like I said before, if it's not you, then maybe you have a nice strong team behind you. And what kind of professional experts do you rely on to support your business? So that's going to be, I understand when you're starting out, you can't afford necessarily to have a CPA and a web designer, an insurance agent, and all these different things. So you tend to wear all the hats, but as you continue to grow the business, right, that will, that will allow you to branch out. So then you got cash flow, right? So do you have enough revenue coming in regularly to make payments on a loan? Okay. That's like I've been saying from the beginning here. How do your customers pay you? And what are your payment terms? And the reason why we ask that is because we want to understand the cash flow, right? Do you get paid every 3 months? If that's the case, you're probably going to have a hard time paying your note every single month, right? But if you are a point of sale person, we know that you're going to have the cash right away. If you're a 30, 60, 90 day, we have to understand what that cycle looks like from a repayment perspective. How do you process your payments? So we want to know, do you take checks, cash, credit cards, right? All that tells us is about how the cash flows through the business. Okay. And then the last piece is collateral. So what can you put up for collateral? All right. A lender wants to know that it can recoup at least some of its investment if your business doesn't succeed. So I like to get a little bit specific on what we look for from collateral. When you're asking for a line of credit, there's pretty much 3 things that the banks will look at to hold as collateral. It's accounts receivable. So let's say you have, 50,000 out in invoices. We'll use that kind of as a collateral just to say, hey, he's got money coming in or she's got money coming in. We can kind of count that. And then equipment. So 50% of your equipment that you maybe have in your warehouse or that you're using for your profession, we can look at that as collateral, or any inventory. So if you're sitting on a bunch of inventory for whatever it is that you might sell, that's also something that provides collateral in any type of line of credit. If you're looking at purchasing a building or any type of a term loan, let's say for a piece of equipment, that actual building or that actual piece of equipment would be the collateral for any type of loan like that. Okay. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to shift gears a tiny bit. We're going to talk a little bit about personal and business credit, because when we talk about getting money or accessing capital, we have to also be able to talk about how does the personal and the business credit score play into this. So personal credit score, it's always been a known thing, right? Somewhere between 300 and 850. You pay your bills on time. You don't carry a ton of debt. The score will be pretty high. If you've got some things, some slow pays, some delinquencies in there, it might, teeter back and forth with going down and back up. Consider also called your FICO score. It's underneath your social security number. It really kind of reflects on you personally. Business score goes under your tax ID number. It's a number between 0 and 100. A lot of people don't understand how business score is actually generated. It's really kind of I will call it a big secret, but we tell you as much as we possibly can. What I know to be true is that the more vendor relationships that you have, or a business credit card or a potential loan, all of these things. And when I say vendor relationships, I mean, if you're a contractor and you have a line of credit at Home Depot, or you purchase inventory from someone and you have a credit line with them, they then report you to the bureau that shows that, hey, they pay their bills on time, they're in pretty good standing, and that builds a credit profile for you. Okay. That's really the part of it that's important, because you come in to get a loan and you've never had any type of business credit before. Sometimes it's not a lack of having bad business credit, it's just a lack of not having business credit. Okay. So The other thing I will say is, as much as possible, keep your business and your personal credit separate. I know a lot of times when people are starting out, they commingle, they have all their business funds going into their personal and vice versa. You need to separate that out. It's important to be able to track your expenses differently, not only for your accountant, but just for yourself, right? So you know what you're actually spending for the business versus your personal. This will help you build up your credit history for your business and will protect you and your family from the downside risk of the business. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's get into the financial data and why it's important. Okay. And all, like I said, this will be in your workbook and it'll specify each specific one a little bit further for you. So next slide, please. Financial data gives loan officers the hard evidence that you can succeed and that investing in your business will pay off. Next slide, please. The first and most important thing that you can do or provide is your tax returns. And like I said, we're going to ask you how long you've been in business. So we could be potentially 1 year, most likely 2 years of tax returns that we're going to ask you from your personal side as well as your business. Okay. Next slide. We are going to also ask you for a balance sheet. Okay. So a balance sheet is a statement of the assets, liabilities, and capital of your business. In other terms, it is how many things do you own from an asset perspective that you could sell off for cash if you needed to, and liabilities on the other side, which is the debt that you have, right? And so when you're constantly looking at balance sheets, it's important for you as a business owner to look at them, because then you could say, okay, do I have enough assets that I could liquidate at any given time to be able to cover the debts that I have? Right. And if it's the reverse, where you're sitting on a lot of debt and don't have assets, it's a scary position to be in. Right. And then there's other times where you have a ton of assets and you don't have a ton of debt. And that's great, because now you feel comfortable that maybe you could take on additional debt because you have enough assets over here to potentially liquidate to cover the debt that you have. Okay. Next slide. The last thing that we ask for is a profit and loss, also known as an income statement. Don't know why they have two names. It confuses a lot of people, but it's one and the same. Okay. It shows the average sales volume of a company's products or service, typically year over year. So why is it important for a business owner to look at one? So let's just say today I asked you, for you to pull an income statement through, I think it's the 7th or the 18th today. It's my nephew's birthday. So if I said to you, hey, April 18th, pull me an income statement from the beginning of the year till now, you could see where your sales were, right? Up until said to you, hey, go back last year and pull the same report from the beginning of the year through April. Where were you at from a sales perspective? Well, let's say you're down $50,000 in revenue from this time last year. That gives you another 8 months to fix it. Right? You can sell more, re-strategize to potentially get yourself back on track, right? But if you're not looking at these statements until the end of the year, you have no idea where the business is at, right? So how do you know if you're behind the ball or you're up, right? Now, another thing that I'll say, these 3 statements are the most important, right? The tax return, the profit and loss, the balance sheet. If you are currently not using accounting software, I highly recommend that you do. Okay. It doesn't have to be QuickBooks. There's one that I really like. It's called Wave. It's WAVE. It's a free platform for 3 things that you need to do. It links to your bank accounts to have all the information that goes in and out. So how you get paid and how you pay will flow right into Wave. It will reconcile. You could see everything and pie charts and everything else, and it will do reporting. So you can do the balance sheet and the income statement. The only thing you need to do is maybe set a schedule, like maybe every Friday afternoon or Monday morning or whatever. You go in, and all you need to do is kind of organize it a little bit, right? So maybe it's got something in an expense category that really should be, it was an inventory expense, right? So you maybe just have to edit it and change the name on it. That's it. Instead of you manually doing all this stuff, because if I called you tomorrow and said, hey, there's a grant opportunity in the city and they need to see a tax return, a profit and loss, and a balance sheet, if you don't have accounting software, you're going to say, well, I don't have the time to go back and create a balance sheet and income statement, right? So we got to start thinking about automation and keeping things a little bit smoother so that you're not missing out on the opportunities when they come available. Okay. All right. So final takeaways, you can stay on this slide, that's fine. But final takeaways are your profit and loss statement and your balance sheet are critically important to the ability to get a loan. The more organized, clear, and accurate the information you provide, the better chances of getting a loan. And, if you can't use a software, you're feeling kind of lost in it, work with a trained professional to prepare those documents. Okay. All right. So credit options. Let me check my time. Okay, we're good. All right. So credit options. A lot of times people get a little overwhelmed with what is available out there for me. Okay. And we're going to really simplify it because there's honestly 3 things. That's it. Okay. There are 3 main types of credit. Number 1 is credit cards. Number 2 is line of credit. Number 3 is a term loan. Okay. Every single thing for a business owner would fall into those 3 credit products. Okay. Think of it as a successful history at each level improves your chances to qualify for more forms of credit. Okay. So next slide. So let's start with the business credit card. Okay. It's easy to access and use, right? Every purchase with a business credit card is like a short-term loan, but with no specific term of number of payments. You can use it for cash flow management in times when you don't want to draw down your accounts, but are confident you can pay the balance within 30 to 60 days. Gain confidence and control with timely purchases that are convenient to track with regular statements, okay, or an online portal. You can manage spending limits, set alerts, and take advantage of perks, right? So many credit cards, you got cash back rewards, airlines, purchase protection, okay? So there's something I want to say about credit cards that I tell a lot of my mentees. I want you to think about a business credit card. And we kind of have to change our mentality on it because we've kind of lived thinking that we use credit cards to kind of fund a lifestyle that we can't afford, right? Because we're okay using credit cards and letting debt sit on there. And we don't even realize that we're paying maybe 20%. And if you have $10,000 on that card, you're paying $200 a month in interest on that card. Okay. It's insane. So think of it if you did it, think about it a little bit differently. What if you were to use that credit card to fund your business? So I purchase inventory, or let's just say inventory in this example. I purchase inventory. That it's 0%. You're not paying interest on anything, okay? Because you've just borrowed it. Your bill comes in 30 days, okay? Still not being charged. You have 30 days to sell that inventory. Actually, your bill's not even due for another almost 30 because it's almost 60 days, sometimes 45 to 60 days before it's due. You could sell that inventory within that time, make that money, and turn around and pay that card off, right? And now that card's back to 0, and you continually borrow. It's like your own loan to yourself at 0% interest, right? There's no other product out there that allows you to borrow ahead of time like that and not charge you a penny for it. The problem is that we get into this mindset where if you, let's say, had a $5,000 balance on a credit card and you get paid, right? You sold all that inventory. So you got paid, let's say $10,000. Nobody wants to take that 5,000 of the 10 and pay it off on that credit card because they say, well, I don't want to spend the cash. What if I need it, right? Think of it this way now. Take the 5,000 of the 10, pay off the card, and now you can use the card again, right? And it's not costing you anything. Does it make sense to keep $10,000 in cash in a bank account and pay, $100 a month in interest just to let that 5,000 sit on that card that you can't even use now because it's maxed out? Right? So we have to learn how to be able to use that card to just float ourselves for that extra 30, 45, maybe even 60 days. Okay. Next slide. Then we go into line of credit. So think of the line of credit as kind of the emergency, the next level after the credit card. Here's another example. That $5,000 balance on that credit card, let's say you only have $4,000 that you could pay it down on. Okay. So pay $4,000 and then borrow $1,000 from the line of credit and pay off that card because that card's 20%. Okay. The line of credit is probably more around like prime +1. So if that were the case, it'd be about 8% right now, way less than what it would be on the credit card. Okay. Then maybe you only need to float yourself another week or two. When you get the money in, pay off that line of credit. The two differences between a business line of credit and a credit card, you float that 0% until that, if you pay that in full, you don't have to pay interest. Okay. The minute that you borrow from a line of credit, interest starts to accrue. All right. So that's why a lot of times people will go to the next slide, please. A lot of people will use the line of credit as an emergency for a couple of things: taxes, shortfalls on expenses, like I just mentioned, or payroll. Okay. Otherwise, you could be using a credit card, getting all those perks, maybe potentially free miles or hotel rooms. Okay. Next slide, please. The last one is a term loan. So think of it as anything that you cannot pay off in 6 months. Like a vehicle, a building, a large piece of equipment, okay? all should be in a fixed loan over a certain amount of time. So 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever it is. Just like when you buy a car, right? You wouldn't buy a car on a variable revolving line of credit. You would buy it like you do now. It's a fixed payment for 5 or 6 years, right? So think of it that way. Credit card, you the line of credit you pull for emergencies, and the term loan is anything that you can't pay off within 6 months. Okay. All right. Next slide. So there's a couple of additional sources of capital outside of the bank. Okay. If you haven't heard of CDFIs are community development financial institutions. There are a ton in Cleveland. There are actually some in every single state. If you actually Google CDFIs in Ohio, there is a chart that comes up that will specifically tell you who they are, what they specialize in, and what cities they service. CDFIs are mainly funded by like Chase funds different CDFIs. Okay. And you think, well, why do we fund CDFIs if we are a lender also? It's because CDFIs sometimes will take on more risk, right? Maybe they're allowing a little bit of a questionable credit history. Maybe they are more focused on a neighborhood revitalization program. So they focus on different things, different industries. Okay. So a lot of times when people come to me and they're maybe not what we call bank ready yet, we can get them over to a CDFI and help them get what they need in the short term until they can get in their business in a better position to potentially get a loan at the bank. Okay. There are obviously credit unions, venture capital funds, which are, putting a greater emphasis on funding minority entrepreneurs, and they may provide new opportunity. And then you have state, county, and cities often offer small business grants. Now, everyone always says, where do I find the grants? There should be a list of them out there. I wish that there were, okay, but unfortunately, grants kind of work like, an organization decides that they're going to fund a particular grant because they want to help a certain demographic or a certain area of town, right? Excuse me. So they'll put out the parameters of what that grant is. Like last year, there was a grant program that came out, and a lot of it was from COVID, and you had to have you had more than 2 employees, you had to had a shortfall in revenue during COVID, and you could apply. They're always changing, right? So I always suggest, connect with people like myself, connect with Teresa, SCORE, different organizations that we connect with on LinkedIn, and you will start to see some of these grant opportunities as they become available, because it's our job as community resources to share that information on LinkedIn so that people that follow us can see them. Okay. So I would say just expand your reach that way a little bit. Okay. Next slide. All right. So we talked about 3 different types of loan programs at the bank. We talked about some alternative lending programs. I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about SBA. Okay. And I want you to think of SBA as just an extra layer that the banks use to help support small business. Okay. So next page, please. And it'll talk through all of this in your book, but there are 3 different types of SBA loans. Okay. And first, what SBA actually is they help small businesses that meet certain qualifications. And to be honest, their qualifications are pretty high. As far as like, they'll help a lot of people. It's not, it's like 15 million. You can go to the next slide. It's like 15 million, I believe, and under of who is actually eligible for an SBA type of loan. Some of the benefits are lower down payment. A lot of times the eligible fees are included in the financing. And they're attractive for companies with a high level of debt or very little collateral, or they're just potentially starting out. Okay. Next slide, please. So this is what I was talking about. So it's 15 million in tangible net worth, generated less than 5 million in revenue or income, over the past 2 years. That includes a lot of people, right? But it's not going to be the Amazons of the world that are going to try to be getting an SBA loan. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Okay. So here's the 3 types. Next slide, please. Pre-COVID, there's only been 3 types ever. SBA got involved in a couple of things during COVID, like PPP and EIDL. Just kind of put those out of your mind. The 3 that they mainly deal with are, number 1, the SBA Express. Okay. SBA Express is $350,000. It could be a term loan or a line of credit. So think of it this way. If you were to come into the bank and you get approved for the loan, but let's say there's a collateral shortfall or you're less than 3 years in business, we may say, hey, we're going to feel more comfortable if we use SBA as some collateral support since you don't really have it. because you don't have a ton of inventory, don't have a ton of equipment, don't have a ton of accounts receivable. And that's where we use the SBA Express loan. There was typically used to be a 3% fee on the loan amount, but ever since COVID, I remember back in 2008, they waived it for a long time. And I'm pretty sure they started waiving it during COVID again. And I still think it's actually not being charged at this point. But even at 3%, if you can't get a loan, if you're starting out small, it's still a reasonable amount to have to pay to be able to get it. Okay. The next one is our 7A. Next slide. 7A. So when I was a lender, I used to do lending for about 17 years. I didn't do a lot of 7A loans. I know some banks they're really popular. A high level, they go up to $5 million. They are for 7 years for working capital to 25 years for real estate. The difference between the 7A and the 504 really comes down to just rate and fees and structure. Okay. So, and when I say that, what I mean is when you go into a bank to get financing, it is not unreasonable for you to ask for a loan comparison tool, right? I want to know what it looks like if I get approved conventionally. I want to know what it looks like if I got approved from a 7A and from a 504, which is the next one we're going to talk about, so that you can decide which fits you best, right? Is it better to take maybe a little bit money up front to get a lesser rate? Or is it better for you that you don't have money up front, so you want to just roll it into the rate? Like, these are all things that every business owner is in a different stage of their business. So it's reasonable to ask for the different types. Okay. The next one, please. So this one is the 504. So this was my favorite one when I was a lender. I think it's just the most reasonable for any business client. So think of it as, I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you wanted to buy $1 million property. Okay. The bank puts in 50%, which would be 500,000. The SBA puts in 400,000, 40%, and the customer puts in 10. So you could buy $1 million building with 100,000 down. The bank would do their 500,000 piece, which would be a 10-year fixed loan with a 25-year amortization, meaning your payments would be less, but in 10 years you'd have to refi. And the SBA piece is locked in to a low rate over 25 years. Never have to touch it again. It's fixed for that whole entire time. So it was ideal for someone who didn't have a ton of money to put down, wanted to have that low fixed rate for that 25-year term. And to be honest, a lot of times they'd pay extra on that bank loan because they wanted to just kind of get it done in 10. So they could just have that 25-year piece on the bigger portion of the loan. And I use $1 million as a pretty large example. It could have been a $300,000 building or a $200,000 building. It's really, really, I think, a very fantastic product. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so building your empire. So I hope that this presentation has helped you to take one more step toward building your own business empire. Okay, remember, you are going to get a workbook that is going to give you everything that we talked about, graphs, guides, everything, via a digital copy. And then I'm also going to send you that cash flow link that I think can be really, really helpful when it comes to either thinking about making a change in your business and how that would affect your bottom line, or if you're in the startup stages where you can potentially use it to create projections. All right. Go ahead to one more slide. So I want you to ask yourself this question one more time. How confident do you feel about your knowledge on business credit options? Like I said in the beginning, hopefully if you were a 2, you're now a 3. If you were a 3, you might now be a 4. It's really just the foundation of the financial statements that you need, the different types of loans that are available, and some of the alternative lenders that are out there. I'm telling you, I cannot tell you enough, connect on LinkedIn with as many people in your community as you can that are in this work, and you will always be in the know of different things that are happening and going on. That's the best way, I think, that you can kind of reach a lot of this information. So next slide, please. I think that'll pretty much wrap it up. Let's do some questions. And I think Teresa will probably have a survey up too, just to kind of say to us, hey, this was great. We could use some more information about this, that, or the other thing. And then I think SCORE will actually have their survey up, or they might even send it out to you guys after. So I think we can kind of open it up for Q&A.
Okay, we have 3 questions, rather long one. So am I understanding you correctly from the perspective or goal of not having a harder time getting a loan for a new business? If a solo entrepreneur started an LLC end of last year and they had the option to claim a $35,000 loss instead of taking the standard deduction, would it be wiser not to itemize the losses, no carry back or carry forward of loss? Or if
Yeah.
we believe the new business income will hit 6 figures in year 2, would it then be a negligible negative to claim a big loss year 1 instead of saying nothing and claiming the standard deduction instead?
Yeah, so I completely hear what you're saying in that question. I know the lingo. So it depends, right? And the reason I say this is because it is very, very common for businesses to reinvest in the business, which AKA also means potentially take a loss, right, in that first year, because you're growing the employees, you're investing back in the business, you're purchasing more inventory. Like it makes sense, right? And not to totally get in the weeds on it, but there are processes through banks that can look at lending a little bit different than the cash flow lens. The cash flow meaning that you're showing enough income to be able to afford the debt you take on, right? There are different programs when you stay on the smaller side of a loan, like let's say $25,000, $30,000, where your revenue size becomes a little bit more of a factor with your credit, right? So let's just say, for example, did 200,000 in revenue. A bank may say, yeah, we could probably extend around 10 to 20% of the revenue on a line of credit, because we understand, right, first couple years in business that you're gonna, maybe take a loss or put money back in. The goal is, and that's a personal decision you have to make. The goal is once you get past those growing pains in the first 3 years, that you start to try a point where you're showing an income that means you can support the debt that you're going to take on. Okay. Without getting too much in the weeds on that, definitely it sounds like you probably use a CPA, because that sounds like a structure that would be put together that way. There is nothing wrong with doing that. I just think that as you continue to grow the business, you need to be upfront with your accountant about if you need to borrow, because if you need to borrow, then that decision becomes a little bit different. Hope that answers your question.
I hope that it does too. It was a good answer. Do we have to wait
Okay.
until our business generates a certain amount of income or owns a certain minimum amount of assets before any bank would consider extending it to us? Or if our personal credit score is 750 to 800 consistently, would that likely be made available to us in the absence of those?
So in the example that I just gave, think of it this way. Credit score is very important, especially from a startup perspective, because your personal credit is going to be a direct reflection on the business. Okay. But I want you to think of it this way. A revenue perspective, if you were to come into the bank and say, hey, I need a $500,000 line of credit, but you make 100,000 in revenue, there is not a bank anywhere that will give you more than you make. Okay. So that kind of can help you to scale it. Think of I always say 10 to 20% of your revenue, regardless of what you're showing from an income perspective, is a pretty fair amount that a bank will consider lending to you. So that's kind of a good rule of thumb when you're thinking about dollar amounts from a lending perspective. But it all is important, right? The credit score is important. I don't want to say that it's not, but when you're talking startup, if the revenue's not there, that's when the business plan and projections become so strong, because they want to see not only is your credit good, but you got a really good plan, right? And potentially some additional income, because maybe you have another job on the side. So maybe you have some money to be able to cover that business loan without even the business, generating revenue at that point. So there's a lot of different factors you got to look at.
Okay. The last one is just, please, can I have a copy? Everybody will get a copy of the slides, a link to the recording, and a copy of the notebook or the workbook that Laura mentioned. So you will get all of those things. So
Perfect.
Let's see, maybe there's another question here. FYI, this is the 35K losses would not be inventory. As a service business, it was pretty much all work-related professional education expenses. Would the use of cash not being used for people inventory, the more traditional things, possibly be frowned upon if I itemize all that out? I don't want banks to frown upon use of how I spent the money.
No, No, I think how you're doing it, I would have to take a look at it a little bit closer to be 100% transparent, which I'm totally willing to do if you wanted to reach out. And we can kind of have that conversation, specifically to your business. Because there's so many factors. That's why it's really difficult to kind of blanket it. I can tell you over 17 years, every single tax return looks completely different. You'd think that there's some synergy between them, but so many different ways to do it. But like I said, I'd be happy to kind of take that one offline, and I can give you kind of some tips and tricks of what, at least from what Chase perspective is. Every bank's a little bit different, but I've worked at a couple, so I can give you some insight on a few.
Okay, so I think we've answered all the questions. And
You might want to remind everybody too that we have a webinar on Thursday for Business 201,
That's
which is
right.
a really,
That's
really good
right.
one. So
yeah, well, I think all of your webinars are fantastic, and the workbooks that
Thank
you
you.
send out are wonderful. I give them out to my clients. I think they're fantastic. And this is a great webinar, and thank you so much. And Teresa, thank you as well.
You're welcome.
So, and thank you all for spending your hour with us, and hope you